Today's lesson is called The Story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff.
My name is Roger, and today we're going to continue summarizing a Greek myth, a Greek story called The Story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Now, remember, Orpheus is a great lyre player. He plays the harp there. I guess you could call it a mini harp. And he was so good that Eurydice, a wood nymph in the forest, fell in love with him. He fell in love with her. But unfortunately, she suffered a fatal accident. She got bitten by a poisonous snake and had to go into the underworld. Orpheus was pretty bummed out about that, so he tried to get his father, or at least his father decided to help him. But Hades said, hey, he's got to work this out himself. So that's where we left off. Orpheus was about ready to go down into the underworld to try to get his beloved Eurydice back.
And he's got his lyre with him. He's going to play that like a beautiful violin or a guitar. And he's going to use his musical ability and skill and grace in order to right this wrong. Yeah, something terrible has happened to him. What a tragedy it was to lose Eurydice to Hades and the underworld there. So he's going to do whatever he can to get her back. Yeah, what a tragedy. Two star-crossed lovers. They find each other, and then one dies. Well, we're not going to stand for this, and nor is Orpheus. Anyways, folks, when we come back, we're going to start learning about Orpheus's descent into the underworld with his lyre.
At the underworld's entrance, Orpheus found Cerberus, a fierce three-headed guard dog. Fortunately, plucking a few notes on the lyre was enough for him to tame the creature, and with Cerberus safely asleep, he continued onward to the chamber of Hades and his wife Persephone.
各位好，第一部分我们看到形容词 fierce 指凶猛的、强烈的，例如 The fierce lion roared at the zoo's visitors. 那头凶猛的狮子对着来动物园的游客怒吼，或是 The proposal was met with fierce disagreement. 那项提案遭受强烈反对。另外，除了上面的意思，这个字还有以下两种用法。第一，指天气狂暴的、恶劣的、严苛的，像是 This will be a fierce storm, so make sure you are prepared for it. 这会是一个强烈暴风雨，所以你要做好准备。第二，指激烈的、狂热的。举例来说 Students were scared of their teacher because of his fierce temper. 学生很怕他们的老师，因为他的脾气很火爆。接着我们看到单字 onward， 这个字是副词，指继续向前。例如 Neil saw Mrs. Anderson hurrying onward when he came out of the room. Neil 走出房间时，看到 Anderson 太太匆匆向前走去。另外，补充一个相关片语 from onwards 表示从开始。我们可以说 From the 19th century onwards, humankind has seen unprecedented technological advancements. 自从19世纪以来，人类见证了前所未有的科技进展。再来，我们看到名词 chamber 指厅、室、房间。举例来说 The captured spy was kept in a chamber for questioning. 遭到逮捕的间谍被留置在一个房间里接受盘问。另外，除了上面的意思，这个字还可以指机器身体内的小空间、腔、室，像是 The most important parts of the machine are in this chamber. 这台机器最重要的部分就在这个槽里。再补充一个相关片语 Have something in the chamber 表示事先准备某事物。例如 Don't worry, we have a great proposal in the chamber for the next meeting. 别担心，我们为下次的会议准备了很棒的提案。
Okay, so there's a nice thing about Greek mythology. If you go to hell or the underworld, there is a chance that you can get out of there. In some religions, of course, if you go to hell, you're stuck there forever. Tough luck for you. But in this particular case, there is a chance that Orpheus can get Eurydice back from the underworld and they can live happily ever after. So Orpheus goes down to the underworld, and at the underworld's entrance, Orpheus found Cerberus. Okay, and who was Cerberus? Well, Cerberus is or was a fierce three-headed guard dog. Ooh, I wish I had one of those to protect my property. But in this particular case, it's a dog, but it's got three heads. It's three-headed, and it's not a good puppy. It's not a good dog. It's a fierce dog. If you're fierce, of course, you're angry and you're violent. And if you get close to that dog, it's going to rip your head off. So you got to be careful there. So that's Cerberus, fierce three-headed guard dog waiting at the entrance. Gee, how is Orpheus going to get past that guard dog?
I don't know. How about the lyre? Remember, when Orpheus plays his lyre, things happen. Objects come alive, and living things, remember, they fall into a dreamlike state of great delight. Now, fortunately, our article continues, plucking a few notes on the lyre was enough for him to tame the creature, and with Cerberus safely asleep, he continued onward to the chamber of Hades and his wife, Persephone. So there you go. All that Orpheus had to do was pluck a few notes on that particular lyre. That was enough.
Yep, if you pluck something, that means you use your hand or your fingers to pull something out of something else rather suddenly. In this particular case, you can pluck the strings of a musical instrument. You can strum them as well if you're playing chords, but if you're trying to play individual notes, sometimes you will pluck those strings. Like you can pluck a chicken, for example, to get the feathers off the chicken so you can cook it. But in this particular case, he plucked a few notes on the lyre, and that was enough to soothe the savage beast. It tamed the creature. Here, to tame just means to make an animal less wild so that you can bring it in the house and people can come over and the dog won't bite them. So here, of course, he was able to tame the creature with the lyre there by plucking a few notes there. Maybe he played a really nice scale or something like that. And with Cerberus safely asleep, he continued onward. He continued forward to the chamber of Hades and his wife Persephone. Okay, so yeah, there's Hades there, and they're in a certain kind of room there in the underworld. It's called a chamber, which is a room usually in a large castle or something like that. And in that room there, or in that chamber, were Hades, the god of the underworld, and his wife Persephone.
So first things first, take care of Cerberus, then you move onward. You do the next step in this journey to the chamber of Hades and his wife Persephone. And now it sounds like Hades and Orpheus are going to have a chat about Eurydice. Anyways, folks, with that, it's now time for us to take a break, but don't go away. We'll be right back after this.
Soon Orpheus stood in front of the pair of gods, unable to find the words to express his feelings about Eurydice and his desire to be with her once again. So instead, he began to play the most sorrowful song he knew. The tune was so moving that by its end, no one in the underworld had a dry eye, not even Hades. He agreed to free Eurydice under one condition. She would follow Orpheus home, but he could not look at her before reaching the land of the living. Otherwise, she would be condemned to remain in the underworld.
第二部分我们看到单字 sorrowful 这个字是形容词，指悲痛的、忧伤的。例如 The old man told a sorrowful story about growing up very poor. 那名老人讲了一个很悲痛的故事，关于他贫困的成长经历。另外，这个字去掉字尾 ful 就成了名词 sorrow， 指不幸的事、悲伤。像是 Charles has known a lot of sorrow in his life, but he still seems like a happy guy. Charles 的人生经历很多不幸，但他人似乎是个快乐的人。或是Joe felt sorrow over the loss of his grandmother. Joe 对奶奶离世感到悲伤。
Now, remember last time we were talking about the fact that Apollo was feeling sad for his son because he experienced such grief at the loss of his dear wife. So Apollo tried to make a deal with Hades, but Hades said, well, I'm sorry, but Orpheus has got to do this on his own. He's got to come down here and make his own case. So here, this is what's happening. Orpheus stood in front of the pair of gods, Hades and his wife Persephone. But but he was unable to find the words to express his feelings about Eurydice and his desire to be with her once again. He was kind of tongue-tied there. Maybe he was nervous at being in the underworld, but yeah, he just could not find the words to express his feelings about her. He could not make his case there, so he had to do something.
Gosh, I thought that Orpheus and Hades here, they were going to finally have this big chat, a come-to-terms thing. They're going to negotiate the return of Eurydice, maybe. Well, that's not exactly what happened. Orpheus felt so much sorrow in his heart that he couldn't express these things with words, so instead, he began to play the most sorrowful song he knew. By the way, sorrow, okay? When we use this word sorrow, we're talking about grief and sadness, okay? And sorrowful is just an adjective that describes someone or something that is full of sorrow, of sadness, so to speak.
Yep, a sorrowful song, a really sad song, maybe played in a minor key or something like that. That's the saddest song that he knew. And the tune was so moving, it was so emotional that by its end, no one in the underworld had a dry eye, not even Hades. So yeah, they all stood to listen. Everybody down there in the underworld were listening to him play the lyre, and it was a very sorrowful song. And everyone was crying. Not one person in the underworld had a dry eye. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. They were all sad after hearing that. And even Hades, the baddest guy of all, he was in tears himself.
Now, Orpheus, it says, could not find the words to talk to Hades, but apparently the tune, the song, did the trick, okay? Get this. Hades agreed to free Eurydice under one condition. Yay! Now, it says here that there is a condition, though. Okay, if you don't meet a condition, or if you don't meet this condition, I should say, this is not going to happen. So yes, he will free Eurydice, but you have to do this one thing for this to work out for you. It says here that she would follow Orpheus home, but he could not look at her before reaching the land of the living. So she could follow him home, but he could not gaze at her until leaving the underworld.
Oh, no. So that's the condition here, because if you do that, otherwise, she would be condemned to remain in the underworld. So yeah, otherwise is like what happens as a result of something else. In Chinese, I guess you guys say 否则, otherwise. You better clean up the house, otherwise mom is going to be mad, okay? That is what the result is of another action. So yeah, if you do turn around and look at her, then this is what's going to happen.
So there you go. If you meet this condition, okay, everything will be great and hunky-dory. If you don't, or otherwise, something bad is going to happen. So otherwise, it says here, she, Eurydice, would be condemned to remain in the underworld, and that does not sound good at all. By the way, here we have the word condemn. That's not a good word. If you're condemned to remain in the underworld, that means you're going to be stuck there forever, okay? Yes, if you condemn someone, usually you make a negative pronouncement as far as they are concerned.
Right. If you murder somebody, you might be condemned to death. That might be your punishment. That is your fate. That is your destiny. So yeah, she will be condemned to remain in the underworld forever and ever until the end of time. So yeah, Orpheus, don't turn around or else she's going to be in big trouble. Okay, let's move on now to the third and final portion of our lesson for today and find out if he resisted the temptation to turn around and look at his beloved wife.
As Orpheus made his way toward the surface, he assumed Eurydice was behind him, but he began to have doubts. What if he was being tricked and Eurydice wasn't following at all? Sneaking a glance over his shoulder, he got one final look at Eurydice's beautiful face before she disappeared down into the underworld forever.
最后第三部分，我们看到片语 make one's way 表示前往、前进，像是 After we go east for a few miles, we'll then turn left and make our way north. 在往东走了几英里路后，我们接着要左转，往北前进。另外，补充一个相关片语 make way for 表示让出位置给点点点，被点点点取代。例如 The old building was torn down to make way for a new park. 那栋旧建筑被拆除，以腾出空间来盖一座新公园。
So, here's the condition. Eurydice can go back to the land of the living, but as she follows Orpheus home, back to the land of the living, Orpheus, he can't turn around and look at her. Now, this might not sound like that's that big of a deal, but Greek myths have a way of taking small details like that and making them very consequential. Anyways, the next sentence says, as Orpheus made his way toward the surface, he assumed Eurydice was behind him, but he began to have doubts. So he's walking there. He can't see this person. How can he know that she's even there? So at first, he assumed she was there, but then he began to have doubts. Doubts began to trickle in there. Anyways, by the way, to assume something, that means that you think that something is true even though you don't really have all the facts. You can't be certain, but you still believe that something is the case.
Right. So, for example, I have a friend from England. His name is Ian, and because he's from England, I just assume that he watches football and likes to eat fish and chips. So I asked him, hey, Ian, do you like to watch, Manchester United or something? Do you like fish and chips? And he said, nope, actually, I don't. I prefer watching rugby, and I like to have meat pies. I hate fish and chips. So I made the wrong assumption there. But here, of course, as he's making his way toward the surface, Orpheus assumed that Eurydice was behind him. Yeah, she must be there. They said she'd be there. And of course, she loves me. I love her. So yes, of course, she's going to follow me. But then he began to have doubts. Wait a minute. Something is fishy here. And then I guess he was asking himself this question. What if he was being tricked and Eurydice wasn't following at all? Yeah, this is Hades. He's the god of the underworld. Maybe he's up to no good. Maybe he's rotten to the core and he's not holding up his end of the deal.
Don't do it, Orpheus. Don't. Just trust that she's there. Anyways, yes, those doubts began to creep in. What if he was being tricked and Eurydice wasn't following at all? So he did it. He snuck a glance. He looked over his shoulder to check and see if she were actually there. Yeah, sneaking a glance over his shoulder, he got one final look at Eurydice's beautiful face before she disappeared down into the underworld forever. And that's the end of the story. That's pretty sad.
Yeah, so of course there are lots of morals that we can draw from this story. You can probably discuss this amongst yourselves. But yeah, I guess he should have resisted the temptation to turn around and sneak a peek over his shoulder. Who did he think he was kidding? Hades is really smart. Of course, he would have seen him do that. He was waiting for any excuse to break the deal. And Orpheus learned his lesson the hard way. I guess he's going to have to learn to play his lyre for some other nymph in a different forest.
I don't think that's possible. You only really fall in love like that once in a lifetime. Poor Orpheus. All right, folks, with that, it's time for us to say bye-bye for now. But don't worry, don't fret. The Chinese teacher is on her way.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。好，故事写到冥王同意让 Eurydice 跟着 Orpheus 回家，不过条件是在抵达人间之前， Orpheus 他不能回头看他的爱人一眼，只是走着走着他就开始起疑心啦。读到课文第3部分第2句， What if he was being tricked and Eurydice wasn't following at all? 要是他被骗了， Eurydice 根本没有跟着怎么办呢？好，那这边用到的句型是 what if 加主词加动词，表示说要是什么什么会怎么样，要是什么什么该怎么办。那么 what if 就跟 what would happen if 意思相同，它后面接的子句呢可以用直说法来表达，也就是时态照正常变化，像课文里面的用法就是。那么 what if 后面接的子句也可以用假设法去表达跟事实相反的情况，例如What if the car broke down on the freeway? 这句话就相当于 What would happen if the car broke down on the freeway? 要是车子在高速公路上抛锚了该怎么办啊？ 那这件事没有发生，可是我们子句去用了过去式动词 broke， 那这边就是用假设法来表达。另外课文句子里面用到 not 什么什么 at all， 它是表达说一点也不，根本不，或者是绝非怎么样。那我们来学习几个意思差不多的用法。第一个是 anything but， 后面可以接名词或形容词，那我们用 anything but 加名词就表达根本不是什么， anything but 加上形容词就可以表达一点也不怎么样。那注意这边的 but 是当介系词用来表达除了什么什么以外，例如The exam was anything but easy， 也就相当于 The exam was not easy at all， 那个考试一点也不简单。好，第二个用法是 far from， 后面可以接形容词或是接名词或动名词去表达一点也不怎么样，绝不怎么样，或者是完全相反的意思。那这个 far from 它其实意思也是跟 not at all 差不多的，例如Their marriage is far from perfect， 他们的婚姻离完美很远，那就表示说他们的婚姻并不完美，称不上完美。那第三个补充的用法是 nowhere near， 意思就跟 not at all 或者是 not nearly 相同，表示说跟什么什么差距甚远，一点也不接近。那我们在 nowhere near 后面接形容词或副词，就可以去强调说一点也不怎么样，远不及什么什么，差得远的意思。好，例如 The project is nowhere near finished， 那个专案离完成还差得远呢。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Fierce. Fierce guard dogs will attack anyone who tries to break into the millionaire's house. Pluck. Declan plucked the strings of his guitar and played a beautiful song. Chamber. Historians believe the ancient building was used as a burial chamber. Sorrowful. Her face turned sorrowful as she read the letter. Otherwise. You must do your homework first, otherwise you won't be allowed to go out with your friends. Condemn. After losing her home and her job, Anne was condemned to a life of poverty. Assume. I didn't ask Lucy if she is coming to the meeting today, but I assume that she will.
Discussion Starter starts now!
And now it's time for our discussion starter. Hey, Roger, are you familiar with other Greek myths or well-known tragedies?
Doesn't have to be Greek, right? But another myth I know about is the story of Chang'e, who flew up to the moon. Somebody had some pills that would make you live forever, and she thought that was a bad thing, so she tried to take those pills away from that other person, and she ended up going to the moon. That's an interesting myth. I think it's cool, and hopefully the Apollo astronauts had a conversation with Chang'e on the moon when they were there. How about you?
Well, I am familiar with a more modern tragedy, namely the story of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. It is a more modern tragedy. It's not modern in the sense that it was written in the 20th century, but it is considerably more modern than ancient Greek myths, and I believe it's just as tragic as some of these myths are, too. Okay, everyone. With that, today's article is now complete. But, as always, we sure hope that you guys have enjoyed reading along with us. Anyways, I'm Jeff.
I am Roger.
See you next time.